Well, we might get underway. I'm particularly interested in this one, Rabbi, because we're holding our first Passover meal down here with the community down here. So I've got my pad ready to make love. You, you better give it to us straight. So welcome, everybody. Great to have you all here again with us this morning on this very, very important subject. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Rabbi, to take us away.
It's. I don't think I can do it in one shot, Barry. It's a long story. What can I say? Anyway, welcome everybody. Certainly, by way of introduction, Pesach is our most meaningful holiday that's celebrated in the home. It's something that we all recall from even from our childhood, because the focus of the night is the children, and that was actually a biblical mandate from Moses. There's certainly a lot of great themes in the festival: freedom, liberation from slavery, the journey to Israel, the promised land. But Moses, on the eve of the Exodus, says that you should tell this story to your children, and that is so important. And who better than to introduce today's story than the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs?
Hang on. All I can see is people's faces, no screen yet.
The philosopher. Say that again?
I can't see your screen yet. Can everyone else see the screen? I can see faces. You haven't shared your screen.
Is that correct, or are you sure?
No, you haven't shared your screen.
It's interesting.
Don't forget, you've got to click it each time, Rabbi. Once in the old Zoom, you could click and then you've got to redo it every time you show a new video.
What do you?
So you've got to click those two boxes again.
For everyone?
Every time you stop and then go back and put another one in, you've got to click those two boxes.
Oh, that's a bit of a okay, a bit of a challenge here. Didn't know that. So since it was share
Screen, make sure the two boxes are clicked, optimize and sound.
and I have to do this every time. Share.
Once you start your PowerPoint, you should be right.
Yeah, but I've done it. Mine's clicked. Sorry.
No, it's still
It's strange.
just still showing gallery view.
I don't know what to tell you.
We can hear lots of clicking, but nothing's happening. Oh, there you go.
So now start your PowerPoint.
This has disappeared.
There it is down the bottom.
This meeting's being recorded.
To do.
There we go.
Yeah, but just what? But are you seeing one screen or two?
We're seeing your desktop.
Do you see the video now? Or?
No. We can hear it, but we can't see it.
I can
You
hear
might
it.
have to close your PowerPoint and reopen it.
Never work with animals or children or technology.
It is strange. Okay. Share. I'm still share.
Aha.
Yeah, but
Back to your desktop.
yeah, but didn't like that. Doesn't.
There you go.
Yep.
We can see Rabbi.
One screen or two?
We've got two.
Oh, now he's one.
None. And let me just see if you get him.
There we go. He's talking from Hamilton.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't have to go through this every time.
The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, inspiration of the French Revolution, believed that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses was the greatest leader who ever lived, because he was able to take a group of runaway slaves and turn them into a nation, and not just any nation, but a nation with the most tenacious identity of any nation in history, because it kept it despite the fact that it lost its land and its power and its home. And he believed that this was the most extraordinary achievement. What he didn't fully understand was how it was achieved. And a key part of the answer to that question lies in the Seder service and the Haggadah, the way we hand on our story to the next generation, as the next generation asks its questions, Manishtana, which are ways of saying, who am I? And we hand on the story. The story of that first Pesach is remarkable, because if you look in the Torah in Parshas Bo, you see that when Moses, on the brink of the Exodus, gathers the people together, he doesn't talk about any of the obvious subjects, freedom, or the land flowing with milk and honey, or the challenges of the journey. Instead, 3 times, he talks about the duty of telling our story to our children. Vaya ki yishalcha bincha macha, when your child asks you. Vaya ki yomru alechem, when your children say such and such to you. V'yigadet alavincha, you shall tell your child on that day. 3 times he talks about telling our story to our children throughout the generations. Why so? Because Moshe Rabbeinu understood that freedom is not won in a single moment. It needs to be fought for in every generation. And that means handing on to our children 3 very important gifts. Number 1, the gift of identity. Who am I? Number 2, the gift of values. How shall I live? And number 3, the sense of continuity, that they are part of a story which includes us as our story includes them. Education as the conversation between the generations. Once you do that, your identity becomes extraordinary and indelible. Some years ago, I was given an award at the Kennedy Center in Washington, and I spoke about the difference between the memorials in Washington and in London. In Washington, all the memorials tell a story. You have the Jefferson Memorial with screeds of text, the Lincoln Memorial with the Gettysburg Address on one side and the second inaugural on the other, the Roosevelt Memorial with the key sentences from each of the decades he spent in public life, and the Martin Luther King Memorial with more than a dozen quotations from his speeches. Whereas in London, the memorial for David Lloyd George consists of a mere 3 words, David Lloyd George. Nelson Mandela gets 2, Nelson and Mandela, and Churchill, deliverer of some of the greatest speeches in history, gets 1, Churchill. In America, a memorial is something you read. In Britain, it's something you see. In America, a memorial tells a story. In Britain, it doesn't. Why? Because Britain took freedom for granted. America knew you have to fight for freedom, fight against the British as it happens. But never mind, you have to maintain that identity and tell the story. What Pesach tells us is that values can be and should be universal. Freedom, justice, human dignity. But identity is always particular, and it always comes with a story. And that is why, because we never stopped telling the story on Pesach, we never ever lost our identity in all those many centuries and all those many dispersions. That is what we give our children on Pesach. Number 1, the knowledge of who they are. Number 2, a sense of how to live. And number 3, a sense of continuity, that they are building on what we began. Those 3 things are great gifts. A very gifted young composer and dramatist called Lin-Manuel Miranda some years ago wrote a musical, you may have heard of it, called Hamilton. It ends with the last song in the musical with 3 questions. Who remembers our name? Who keeps our flame? Who tells our story? Because of Pesach, we will always remember our name. We will always keep the flame, and we will always tell the story. The longest, oldest, most inspiring story the world has ever known. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. A good Pesach to you.
Nobody does it like that, man. I tell you, it's just incredible. All right, so in the first instance, let's understand how the Jewish people there got to Egypt, and the source was during what we call the covenant of the parts, and that occurred in Genesis and in Bereshis. And there Hashem made a covenant with Abraham, and he gifted him the land of Israel. He told him, your children will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And but on the other hand, your children are going to be strangers in a foreign land. They'll be enslaved there for 400 years, and I will judge that nation, and afterwards they will leave with many possessions. So the actual period there in Egypt was 400 years. The intense slavery was only 210 years after that Pharaoh who knew Joseph passed away. So let's just go to that was the prophecy. How the prophecy was fulfilled was through Joseph and the famine. So I see John, so go for it.
Jacob and his 12 sons were living in the land of Israel. The second youngest brother, Joseph, who was despised by his brothers, was sold by his brothers to be an Egyptian slave. After Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream correctly and provided food stores for the 7 years of famine, he was appointed second in command over the Egyptian empire. The famine affected the entire region. Yaakov and his household were forced to travel to Egypt to find food and settle there. With that, the period of exile in Egypt had begun. A new Pharaoh came to power, and viewing Yaakov's growing family as a threat, he enslaved them, subjugated them to forced labour, and ordered the drowning of all newborn Jewish males in the Nile River.
Yeah, so that was the beginning of the prophecy, but it was only in the latter part that the difficult slavery began. It's interesting. So Pharaoh perceived the Jews here as a threat, as a foreign nation that would join an enemy, and that's why the enslavement began. This also gives us a bit of insight that on numerous occasions Moses tells the Jewish people that you should not hate the Egyptians because we were there as their guests for 400 years. In contrast to the Amalekites who attacked the Jewish people without any reason whatsoever. The next part then of the process was that Moses, who had fled to Midian, received a prophecy from Hashem in one of the most visual of the prophecies of the forefathers, in that Hashem appeared to him in the midst of a thorn bush. David?
You're muted, David.
The angel of Hashem appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a thorn bush. The bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Hashem tells Moses, I have seen their pain. However, my people had forgotten that I promised Jacob I would save them. Therefore, the time has now come for me to free the Israelites from slavery, go to Pharaoh and free my nation.
So again, the revelation was in a thorn bush, so to typify that, to symbolize that he's with them in their pain. Conversely, Moses was worried that the Jewish people would be extinguished, and that's the further symbolism of the thorn bush was not consumed, notwithstanding the Jewish people are there in this great affliction. The fires of that affliction will not consume them. So just to explain this a bit better, with the second best Moses that ever was. Well, this began, obviously, as you know, that we had the
Yours was the face I saw above my cradle. The only mother I've ever known.
But my feet are set upon a road that I must follow.
From director Cecil B. DeMille.
I will teach thee.
Men shall be ruled by law, not by the will of other men.
Slaves are mine.
The Academy Award-winning film.
Let my people go.
Of the unforgettable definitive Bible story.
I know not his God, neither will I let his people go.
You have not obeyed the Lord.
This night, the Lord our God will deliver us from the bondage of Egypt.
They shall die under my chariot wheels. So let it be written, so let it be done.
Starring some of film's greatest legends. The greatest epic of all time.
Behold his mighty hand. Those who will not live by the law shall die by the law.
The Ten Commandments.
It's actually quite fascinating. I just did a bit of, I heard on a podcast that Cecil B. DeMille was absolutely obsessed with this film to the extent he actually went to Mount Sinai. And actually he took some of the rocks from Mount Sinai and the 10 tablets that were in the movie are actually taken from that Mount Sinai rock. But at a deeper level, before the film was shown for the first time, he actually, and you can look it up on YouTube, and I encourage you to do so, he actually introduces the movie in terms of the contemporary message of the day, because at that time, communism and Stalinism was at its height. And he said, and the message obviously of America was that man is free, man is there to worship not another man, not another human being, but to God. And that's sort of the background to this whole story. And that's why it actually resonated, particularly at that time, with communism at its height. And unfortunately, many sympathizers to communism in the United States, and he wanted to send the message across that man is not destined to be a slave. So certainly part of the symbolism that we're familiar with, they had to sacrifice a lamb, they had to roast it, and then on the outset of the 10th plague, the Israelites were told to put the blood of that lamb on their doorpost to identify the doorpost. In Hebrew, the word Pesach normally is Passover, but in Hebrew it has a meaning of to hover over, to pity, and also to skip over. So that probably has the meaning that he will skip over the houses of the Jewish people. So before the Exodus, he gathers the people together in a landmark speech, and really this is what he says to them. As you've got a beard and look nearly exactly the same as Moses, Michael, you definitely have to read this.
Moses instructs future generations to tell the story to the children. In days to come, when your children ask you, "What does this mean?" say, "With a mighty hand, the Lord God brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." When your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then you tell them, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our home when he struck down the Egyptians."
So no less than 4 times does Moses encourage the people to speak, to tell the children.
Passover Seder, or in American, Seder.
As was highlighted by Rabbi Saxon. And this festival, the whole night, is actually focused on the children. The children have a significant role. They ask, specifically in the context of the ceremony of the evening, and we utilize a book called the Haggadah. There are 4 questions to ask, which we'll touch upon. There are other aspects of the night that we involve the children, because the main purpose is that we hand over this story to them. So just to just give us a bit of an overview of the evening with Mayan Bial.
Come in many forms, from those filled with skits to those lasting all night to those rushed through in an effort to get to the food. Whatever your seder, there are some symbols and customs you'll see most of the time. In the middle of the table, there's wine, a stack of matzah, and a cup of wine for Elijah the prophet, who's said to visit every seder. Additionally, there's the seder plate. It can be anything from a fancy ceramic piece imported from Israel to a makeshift number hacked together from picnicware. On the seder plate, a shank bone, egg, bitter herb, charoset, karpas, and a piece of lettuce. Each thing symbolizes a different aspect of Passover. Also, everyone has a Haggadah, the book or printouts that guides you through the Seder. There are tons of different Haggadahs. Minimal and elaborate, you can get them in Hebrew, English, or both, with any kind of commentary you like, from feminist to environmental to Hasidic to political. There are versions for kids, for interfaith groups, and for activists. And of course, people remix the tradition every which way to make it their own. Seder literally translates to order, so let's talk about that. There's a few traditions to start. Blessing the wine, washing your hands, dipping veggies into salt water, and then breaking the middle matzah. Half of it, called the afikoman, gets hidden surreptitiously. Then comes the main event, the telling of the Exodus from Egypt. Or more accurately, the main event is an interactive reading of rabbinical discussions about how to remember the Exodus. When the Seder was put together, the rabbis assumed everyone going in knew the story, so it was silly to just retell it. Instead, they went deeper, and in doing so, created a holiday that is about memory. How do people, today, relate to these themes of liberation and redemption? At many Seders, people go around the table and read a paragraph each from the Haggadah. People add songs and discussions about what happened back then and about parallels with today's world. Seders around the world may include diverse traditions, like hitting your neighbor with green onions, pouring water on the floor, or pulling out a bag of plushy plates. And overachievers hold all-night seders. One famous part of the seder is the 4 questions, where the youngest child at the table asks, Ma nishtana? If you are the youngest child, you can practice here. Learning songs is a great way to prep for the Seder. If you have to pick one, make it the chorus to Dayenu. It's one word, and you can learn it here. After the storytelling piece, there's a few more customs. More hand-washing, eating matzah, then maror, something bitter like horseradish, then a matzah maror sandwich, and then dinner. If you're at a Sephardi Seder, there might be kitniyot included. People's strenuousness about keeping kosher for Passover varies widely. For instance, some folks won't eat anything made with wet matzah, including the Passover staple, matzah balls. After the main meal and dessert, there's the search for the afikoman. Whoever finds it gets a prize, and everyone else gets the ability to finish the meal with a tiny piece of matzah. Now, just being honest, a lot of seders peter out here with tired kids and matzah kugel-induced food comas. But at a full seder, you continue with Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, followed by opening the door for Elijah, a special set of songs of praise called Hallel, more wine, and the famous closeout next year in Jerusalem. Then, 2 popular bonus songs are Echad Mi Yodea and Chad Gadya. If you want to learn those, click over there. Haven't had enough of Seder yet? Lucky you! Outside of Israel, traditional Jews celebrate 2 nights of Seders, and there are lots of other variations out there. It's a quirky holiday. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Happy Passover.
Okay, so just to unpack this a little bit, so on the table we have what we call the kaira, the plate, or the Seder plate. The word Seder, as she said, means order. Kaira means a plate. So there are 6 items there, so let's just go through them. So the key celebration in biblical times was actually the eating of the Paschal lamb. They slaughtered a lamb, they roasted it. So they had shwam, if you will, and then they put the matzah, which in those days was like a laffa, and then they put the romaine lettuce in the middle. So if Lord Sandwich invented the sandwich because it was playing poker the whole night, we Jews invented the wrap. So that's to our credit on the night of Pesach. So since the temple was destroyed, we do not slaughter the lamb. We only put a symbolic bone there, but not a lamb bone. We actually put a chicken neck there. The other symbolism is that there was a offering that was brought up on the holiday, so we put a hard-boiled egg there representatively. Why an egg? An egg is interesting. It's one of the rare things that if you boil it, it doesn't go soft, it goes hard. So also the Jewish people, even though they go through trials and tribulations, it makes them stronger, not weaker. And certainly, as the biblical verse alludes to, the Egyptians made their life bitter with hard labour, with mortar and bricks and all manner of labour, and therefore we eat moror. So it could be horseradish, which is currently in Caulfield selling for $120 a kilo. So now that you've moved to that farm down there, if I could recommend you start growing horseradish, and remember me. So the other option for horseradish is actually romaine lettuce, which you're probably familiar with. So we use a mixture of both. But I do have the horseradish sticks, and I'm not looking forward to grating them, because if you think onions are bad, try grating horseradish. The other thing is we have, it's a night about the children, so we just have some greenery there, some parsley sometimes, or a boiled potato, simply for the children to ask the question, why are we having it there? And finally, harasis, which is a classic Jewish dish. It's a mixture of apples, walnuts, wine, which resembles the bricks and mortar that the Jews used when they were enslaved by Pharaoh. And during the night, each one of these has a role to play within the text, within the Haggadah. Barry, I can see you, so if you want 4 cups.
The 4 cups of wine. 4 cups is based in Exodus 6:6-7 on the 4 different terms of deliverance. I'll bring you out, deliver you, redeem you, and take you to me for a people.
So for each one of these, we actually drink a cup. So to do it properly, you actually have to drink the full cup. And when we drink the cup, we actually lean, because in a sense to symbolize that we are a free people. Obviously, grape juice is an option. And of course, the other symbolism of the night is the matzah. Donna?
Okay. The 3 matzah, they bake matzah cake from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leavened. So they have been driven out of Egypt and could not delay. And they had also not prepared any provisions.
Yeah, so we, the matzah today, we still use the hand-baked matzah, which is a piece here. It's actually interesting, a lot of the matzah is certainly made in Israel, but came out of Ukraine, because they have a lot of wheat fields there, and there are a lot of Chabad rabbis there that supervise that, but obviously because of the war, that has not been able to happen. So most of the matzah comes out of Israel. What's interesting, the machine matzah, the square matzah in the box that you're familiar with, that some of you may have in Coles, was originated in the United States in the late 1800s by a man called Manischewitz. He saw with industrialization, he saw a way to mass produce the matzahs. We don't we only eat the hand-baked matzahs over Pesach. What's fascinating about Manischewitz is that he actually made his fortune not from Jews but from non-Jews, because at that time everybody was going across America because of the gold rush, and they needed a staple food that doesn't go old, and matzah was the choice. And a lot of the pioneers took matzah with them for that journey to the promised land in that time, California. So Barry, I can't see anybody else, so please.
Who we got there?
The Haggadah. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All those who are hungry, let them enter and eat. All who are in need, let them come celebrate the Passover. Now we are here, next year in the land of Israel. This year we are enslaved, next year we will be free.
So it just these are the opening words of the Haggadah. Haggadah comes the word teach your children. On the left-hand side, the Haggadah is actually our most often printed Jewish text, and there are over 5,000 that are in existence today. On the left is a 12th century manuscript Haggadah, and there are quite a few of not quite. There are some available in many of the great libraries. Like Oxford has one. There's a famous Sarajevo Haggadah, which has a fascinating history. And each generation really reprints this text and embellishes it with its own drawings and backstory. So this really sets the tone of the night, that we invite all those that are hungry, let them come and eat, but we're cognizant this year we're enslaved and next year we will be free. And this is really the primary message of the Haggadah as well, as Jews who said these words as they, throughout Europe in certainly the Middle Ages, were confined to ghettos and oppressed, they always saw a better day ahead. So just briefly, Rabbi Schatz gives an interesting insight into these opening words that are worth.
Those two questions combined puzzled me for a long time. The Seder night begins with a really, really unusual statement, a very odd invitation. Here is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Whoever is hungry, come and eat. And what kind of hospitality is that to offer somebody else, come and share some of my afflictions? It's very odd. Equally, what is odd is the fact that at the beginning of the Seder, we call the matzah the bread of affliction. But towards the end, towards the meal, just before we actually eat the matzah, he says, this is the bread the Israelites ate as they were leaving Egypt, when they had to hurry and they didn't have time to wait for the dough to rise. Is matzah the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt, or is it the bread of freedom that our ancestors ate as they were leaving Egypt? So those two questions combined puzzled me for a long time, until I read that extraordinary book, If This Is a Man, written by a survivor of Auschwitz, Primo Levi, in 1946, within a year of his being liberated from Auschwitz. He says a very surprising thing. The worst days of all were the days between the moment when the Germans left Auschwitz, taking whichever prisoners could walk with them on a death march. And for 10 days, it was only the sick left in the hospital who couldn't walk at all, who were left there. And the 10 days between the Germans leaving and the Russians arriving were the worst days of all. There was no food, no power, nothing. They were left freezing cold and starving. And Levi is scrabbling in the frozen earth to see if he can dig up some root vegetable. And somebody sees him and summons him in and says, here's some food, come and share it with me. And he writes, at that moment, we ceased to be prisoners. And we became free human beings. In Auschwitz, you could not share your food with somebody else, because if you did, you would die. And here for the first time was somebody offering to share his food with me. And I suddenly realized that was the moment we were free. And that explains the Seder service. Here is the bread of affliction eaten in slavery. But when we invite others to share the little that we have, we turn the bread of affliction into the bread of freedom. To be free, you have to care for somebody else's freedom as well as your own. And that is the message of Pesach that Jews have carried with them through the ages. And that is what makes Jews the agents of redemption in the world.
So just to briefly touch upon, we engage the children. There's a set text in terms of what they ask. They question the customs of the night, and the child asks, on one hand, we're dipping food. Why are we dipping food? And in biblical times, many times the affluent used to eat their food while on reclining couches. And they said, and on that night, actually, when we eat the matzah and drink the wine, we have to recline to the left. And it's a sign of affluence and freedom. And then the child notices that we're eating the matzah, which is the poor man's bread, and the bitter herbs. So in a sense, he's asking, why is there such a contrast in this night? On one hand, we're doing things that show freedom, the other time we're eating matzah and bitter herbs. But in essence, that's the answer, that before midnight we were slaves, and after midnight, as we left Egypt, we were free men. And again, this is all about engaging the children. In the Torah, the rabbis have interpreted that Moses is actually speaking to 4 different types of sons. To a wise son, a wicked son, a simple son, and one that does not know how to ask. And again, these sons are portrayed over the centuries in different garbs, in different lands, and different Haggadot. But the message is clear. You've got to use a different language for every single child to teach the child on his level, and that's what an educator does. One of our great rabbis made an observation today. There's a 5th son, the son that doesn't even come to the Seder night, the son who is totally apathetic. At least the wicked son is at the table. And in the positioning of the sons, we actually put the wise son next to the wicked son, because it's up to the wise son to bring the wicked son closer. This clip is a bit corny, but it's actually quite profound.
Why is the sky blue? You're driving me crazy. When are you gonna stop asking me these questions already? Why is the sky blue?
Hello, Michael speaking.
Because.
Why is the sky blue? Why? Why? You want it to be purple? What is wrong with you? Hey, everybody, get a load of this! Why is the sky blue?
That is a brilliant question. I'm so proud of you. Let's look up the answer together.
Children are a reflection of who we are, and therefore we need to put time and effort, individual time and effort, to every single child. One of the other quite meaningful statements is V'hi Amdo, where we acknowledge that not only one has arisen and tried to destroy us, rather in every generation they tried to destroy us, and Hashem saves us from their hands. V'hi Amdo. I'll just share with you a part of a very powerful contemporary video, which will speak for itself.
On the morning of October 7th, our son Daniel was commanding a tank at an army base bordering the Gaza Strip. For hours, Daniel and his crew fought scores of terrorists, putting their lives on the line to protect Israel. Their tank, hit by RPG missiles and mines, was overrun. Daniel was injured and taken captive in Gaza. Other than that, we had no information about Daniel's condition or whereabouts. Our older son Jonathan also fought valiantly on October 7th. He was shot in the leg and evacuated to a hospital. 10 days later, Jonathan limped to the chuppah at his wedding. With our son Daniel missing, these were amongst the hardest moments of my life. Yet we were able to shift from sorrow to celebration and had a beautiful, joyous wedding. After 163 days of torturous waiting, we received a knock on the door with the news. The IDF concluded, based on new video evidence, that Daniel was killed on October 7th. His body is still held captive in Gaza. Daniel, throughout your life, you demonstrated incredible strength of character, discipline, courage, resilience, and emotional maturity. For 163 days, the entire Jewish nation held you in our hearts and prayers. Although this is not the ending we hoped for, we know that you are in a very high place, having proudly given your life to defend the Jewish people. We love you and we miss you terribly. In the Passover Haggadah, we say that in every generation they try to destroy us. Pharaoh, Rome, crusades, inquisitions, pogroms, Nazis, Hamas, Iran. Suffering is part of our history, yet victimhood never defines us. We are a nation not of bitterness and despair, but of hope and faith. Our job of Tikkun Olam is to transform the evil into good. At the Passover Seder, we raise the cup of wine and declare, by your blood you shall live. We pledge to transform the blood of suffering into the wine of celebration.
Yes, unfortunately what they have to go through. I posted a very powerful video on this topic by Rabbi Goldstein. There are two components to the Seder. The first half focuses on the past. After we finish our meal, we look towards the future. And at that point, we pour a fifth cup, which is the cup of Elijah. We actually go to the door, open the door to welcome him in. And again, this is also an opportunity for the children to see if they can see Elijah, to see if some of the cup's been drunk. So invariably, as you get up from the table, obviously a bit of wine spills out. So the children are excited that Elijah has come drunk from the cup. And indeed, we finish up. Someone want to read this?
Future redemption. God promises to show us wonders, the final redemption, just like Exodus from Egypt.
And we conclude, and again, there are a lot of songs on the night which I've not taken into consideration, but we sing Lashana Haba Yerushalayim, which you may be familiar with.
Lashana Haba, Lashana Haba, Lashana Haba, Lashana Haba, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim. For 2,000 years we sang. Next year in Jerusalem. For 2,000 years we prayed to be free in our old land. For 2,000 years we cried for you, oh Jerusalem. For 2,000 years we died in the distant lands. Shana Haba, Yerushalayim, Shana Haba, Yerushalayim, Shana Haba, Yerushalayim, Shana Haba, Yerushalayim.
On that note, everybody feel free to get up and start dancing. So you want to stop the recording?
Yeah.